Welcome. You're listening to the Keeping Ashland Healthy podcast, a podcast production of the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Ashland County, Ohio. Thanks for joining us.
And welcome back to another episode of the Keeping Ashland Healthy podcast. My name is David Ross. I'm the Executive Director here at the Mental Health and Recovery Board in Ashland County. Just glad to be back with you all for another episode. I'm going to do this one solo. For those of you that have heard Elise, she'll be joining me on another episode, hopefully many more episodes coming up. But an opportunity came up from our partners down in South County in Loudonville, our friends Larry and John over at Redbird Resilient. They're doing a talk down in Loudonville at the Ohio Theater there on polarization, and they invited myself and a few other folks to talk on this, I think, very obviously timely subject of polarization. So I also thought you all would be interested in this topic because so much of it involves discussion, processing through maybe internal beliefs, etc. And we talk so much on the podcast about connection and communication, relationships, and polarization is really one of those things that can get in the way of those things. So I thought it made some sense to give you a little bit of what I'm going to talk about tonight, but actually more. Aren't you lucky? You'll get more of what I just won't have because of time constraints, a chance to talk through everything I'm going to share with you all on this episode. So I'll talk a little bit of define maybe one of the more common definitions of polarizations. Talk about the three kinds, which a lot of people do not realize. There's really three kinds of polarization. I hope that'll make sense. I think once you get it, you'll say, that makes a lot of sense. And you can, I think, spot it in yourself and others a lot easier once you kind of think in terms of those categories, maybe some goals. And certainly want to talk towards the end about how do we get out of kind of that raw, divisive polarization and into conversation again. And again, maybe what role is corny as some of you may think this sounds, but what role does faith, concepts of faith and hope and love play in rectifying or solving some of the polarization that we have going on internally between us and in community. So let me dive in and talk about the definition first. And our good friends at Merriam-Webster, and they've been around a long time. I like to go to them. They've defined it as a division into two sharply distinct opposites, a state in which opinions, beliefs, or interest of a group or society no longer range along a continuum, but become, and this is a key word, but become concentrated at opposing extremes. Okay? So obviously, there is no such thing really as a monoculture, meaning everybody believes the same things about everything all the time. That would be not good. Okay, I don't even think robots, we could say, have a monoculture. So human beings range all across the spectrum, depending on the topic, depending on who they are, their upbringing, all kinds of factors range. But when it comes to certain issues, maybe the easiest one that comes to mind is probably politics, right? Some of the hot button so-called political issues, a candidate or an issue, what we start to see is a concentration of opinions by large portions of the population, and the concentration isn't in the middle of this continuum, but it tends to be on the extreme end. So that's really, when people talk about polarization, they're talking about those concentrations of individuals that have similar beliefs, but those beliefs are way on the opposite ends from each other. All right, at least that's the way it appears, right? So, so it's like A versus non-A. So I believe in this, I don't believe in that. So, and it's very strongly held, oftentimes, those opinions. Okay, so that's a definition. If we go ahead with that as a definition. Let me talk to you real quick about the three different types, and hopefully this will make sense. Think of it as maybe ripples or circles emanating outward, going outward. So we start within the person, then we start between people, and then even larger between organizations, communities. So intra, inter, and then what is often called transpersonal. So intrapersonal is within a person, interpersonal between people, transpersonal is more of a system level, a societal level, okay? Hopefully that'll make sense. So intrapersonal polarization, somebody that has polarization within themselves, what that looks like is, and you might say, David, how can somebody polarize within themselves? Easily. Haven't you ever been listen to me now, of two minds on a particular issue? Certainly you have, right? You think about, should I do this or I do that? I'm torn is something, sometimes you hear people say that, or I've said that. I'm torn on this. I'm not, I think I could do this or I could do that. Ugh. One would lead this way, one would probably lead the other. So conflict inside the individual's own thinking or your own values, that is what intrapersonal polarization can look like. So you might have, it might be beliefs, it might be emotions, it might be priorities, and you're wrestling with that within yourself as an individual. So this is often experienced when somebody has this intrapersonal polarization is tension. Another way it comes out as indecision. So someone literally is like, I can't make a decision. I don't know if I should do X or Y, and they're undecided because they're of two minds. There's these 2 points of view, or these two ideas, or these two desires, whatever it might be within them. Sometimes people call that a cognitive dissonance, trying to hold two ideas, but these ideas are polar opposites of each other. How do you hold both of those at the same time? It's challenging. So oftentimes, if I'm working with somebody or talking with somebody, the task is to see if we can't help clarify their values and integrate maybe some of these different priorities that they're struggling with. So that's intra, all right, within a person. All right, the second type of polarization is inter. That one's probably a little easier to understand because that's the kind of polarization we see a lot on the news and in our lives. It's between people, okay? So the conflict can be between individuals sometimes, or groups of individuals. And so, oftentimes what we see is the different perspectives harden into opposing positions. And because of that, we often see misunderstanding, conflict, gridlock between the groups. All you have to do is turn on television, listen to some podcasts, news feeds. This is easy to spot. So what we really need to focus on to help solve that is dialogue between the groups or the individuals, listening to the other person. I can't tell you, I really have cut down on how much news I watch, particularly those talking heads, as they're called, where there's 4, 5, 6 different people around a table, because all they do is talk over each other. That is, to me, particularly as a counselor, and as somebody that really believes in productive conversation, that is pointless. That is not helpful when everybody is talking at the same time, talking over each other, yelling over each other. That's not helpful. So listening, productive dialogue, and if we can do those things, then we start looking for some kind of shared ground, right? Just to move the conversation forward in a productive way. All right, that's the second type, inter. Now, third type, transpersonal. A little bit maybe different if you've not thought about this. This is that system level, societal level polarization. And this can happen when there's a conflict embedded in systems, institution, or culture. So this is, again, around worldview issues, policies, structural incentives. Maybe an easy one that's been in the news has to do with immigration. Who is a citizen? How do we think about folks that are here legally versus illegally? We have conflict in the Middle East right now. What should be our approach to that and why? We've had religious issues. The president recently, the back and forth with the Pope, people have had all kinds of thoughts about that. So this is more of this larger level, system level, societal level than just an individual. And really what we're looking there, and there could be policy debates, issues around what we should fund or not fund, So the key task there really is around getting folks to think, around systems, about policy alignment, and maybe long-term change. That's usually the goal when we're struggling with transpersonal polarization. How can we bring people together or systems together around policies and long-term change? So real quick, simple way to distinguish intrapersonal, where it happens within the person. The core challenge there is integrating different competing values within the individual. Interpersonal, where it happens is between people, and the core challenge there is managing disagreement between the individuals. Transpersonal, where that happens within systems or society, and the core challenge then is aligning structures and incentives. Okay? Simple way to distinguish that. So I wanted to use some of the work here at the Mental Health and Recovery Board just as a way to kind of talk through this a bit more. Most of you know that we have a 12-member volunteer board. These are wonderful individuals that do their best to represent the mental health and substance use challenges that we experience in our county from what they hear and see and what they've experienced themselves. And they make decisions around how the board should fund, what they should fund, what should we prioritize, et cetera. And again, we have regular meetings. Those are public meetings, and anybody's welcome to attend those either in person or over Zoom. We always post those meetings, but the members themselves, they don't always agree. And you can imagine having 12 different individuals in a group talking about various policies and funding and services that you wouldn't anticipate they would always agree on everything. So I've had a chance to actually, put into practice some of these things I'm talking about, and I thought it would make some sense to talk about that a little bit. So sometimes in board settings, again, you can apply this to your own work setting, your own family system setting, your next Thanksgiving gathering, right? So I'm talking about in the context of my board meetings, but this is easily applicable in any other setting. So, sometimes you might see members struggling. So I might notice we're talking about a particular service, let's say, or a program, and maybe one of my board members is struggling, but the struggle is internal, right? So it's just within them because they might have a really strong opinion about funding a certain program or, how it focus on certain individuals, et cetera. So they might be struggling internally. So that's that interpersonal. And the reason they might be struggling is because they have a very different belief. Maybe that belief that they have goes contrary to what direction they think the board might be moving in. You see what I mean? So, but that's between them and their own issues and what the board is discussing. But then the more common one would be if just board members disagree with each other. So we're talking about that same program or service, but they disagree. One says, I think that's a great program. The other one says, no, I don't think it's a good program at all. So there might be members going back and forth around that, and that's the interpersonal. And they have different reasons why they feel the way they do. But then the issue sometimes can be even broader, where we're talking in terms of, well, the state of Ohio is moving in this direction, but Ashland County is moving in this direction, right? So we're moving in this direction because of these reasons, and the state of Ohio is moving in this direction because of these reasons. So I'll give you a wonderful example. My board, we've talked about this a lot in our meetings, 988. So 988 was a federal initiative to start 24/7 mental health substance use crisis hotlines in all the states. The challenge was in Ohio, we had a board system in place for 40 years, plus boards in Ohio at least, not in all states, but in Ohio at least, the boards had already established 24/7 crisis helplines, call lines for their folks to utilize. In Ashland County, we have ours as well. We've had it for many, many, many years. It's 419-289-6111. That's our 24/7 crisis number. So that federal initiative, again, states had to adopt it, but in Ohio, it already existed. But states weren't really given the option to opt out. So Ohio really started pushing 988 and that created some tension, right? So while the state was prioritizing 988, the board continues to prioritize our local number because of, again, the familiarity and we've had such good success. These are local people answering the phone versus somebody that might be in a call center 2 or 3 or 4 counties away, sometimes a state away. Okay, so that's an example of a transpersonal. So we have really strong beliefs and reasons why we think our local number is preferred over the federal or the state push for a statewide regional call center. Make sense? Hopefully. That's an example of just my work at the board and trying to put that into some context. So if, as I said before, if I notice that a board member might be struggling individually, intrapersonally with something, again, maybe I'll talk to that person about, just trying to understand clearly kind of what's going on for them, why that is a struggle. To the extent we can figure that out, I might encourage them to what we say, hold competing values at the same time. So let's tease out what are the values maybe that they hold versus what are the values that are behind what the board might be promoting, and see if we can't hold them both together, kind of compare and contrast. It's not so much about either or thinking, but more about what we call both and. Is there a way that we can find a way for these two things to both to exist if possible? So can we look for compromise? Can we maybe be clear that, well, this is a personal bias perhaps, and I shouldn't allow my biases to overrule maybe what is needed for our community, et cetera. But again, also, our board has mission, vision, and values, and making sure that those things are being, we're being consistent with our mission, vision, values. So just asking the board member to become maybe more thoughtful, self-aware decision makers, as opposed to just being reactive or rigid. That's all I can ask for in a board member or, a friend or somebody that I'm going to spend time with is that, that where we disagree on issues that they at least try to listen, understand the other side, and be thoughtful themselves about maybe exploring a little bit, why are they holding to the beliefs that they're holding? Do a little bit of own analysis about where that might come from. And maybe it is something somebody might say, well, in our family, we've always believed that. Well, if that's the extent of the basis, maybe some pushback on that might be warranted. Just believing something just because it was a tradition, maybe that's good enough, but maybe it's not. So at least talking through that. But what about that situation, David, about interpersonal? Maybe we got 2 board members that are struggling because they're very of a different mind on an issue. So the goal there, trust, understanding, constructive disagreement, right? So we're trying to create a culture where disagreement is expected but not destructive. I have no illusions that 12 people, talking about some very complex issues are always going to agree at all the time. However, I think we all want a culture where it is constructive rather than destructive, where we prioritize listening to understand, not just to respond. So there's a few takeaways I want you to absolutely get from the program, and that's one. It's very important when you know that you're on a different have a different opinion than somebody else, try to listen to understand what they're saying, not just to respond, okay? If we all just did that one thing, that would go a long way. Listening to understand, not just to respond. And then try to discuss differences as early as we can when we notice they exist, and respectfully respect the other person. So they're holding a different opinion or point of view. That doesn't make them a bad person. So being able to separate out an opinion or a belief or an idea from the actual human in front of you is critical, all right? And then what we quickly do is we say, hey, why are we all on this board again? Because we're focused on our shared purpose to help the citizens in the community, right? So even when our perspectives might differ, we're all here for the same shared purpose, and that helps a lot to kind of bring us all together. So, the practical aim, if you will, is so the board functions as one cohesive body capable of making difficult decisions without fragmentation. All right. Now, transpersonal, this is that system, community level. So what that might look like in terms of a goal would be, see how we couldn't align and make sure we're protecting our public trust in us as a board and our legitimacy. And so what I mean by that is sometimes maybe the board takes a position that maybe various groups in the community don't understand or disagree with. So it's important that the board then communicate decisions that it makes in a way that is clear, transparent, grounded in principles. Okay, so board, like all public bodies, produces minutes of our meetings, all of our meetings. So those minutes, if they're done correctly, and we try really hard to do them correctly, again, it's not dictation, it's not transcription, but it is a reflection of everything, a true and honest reflection of what occurred at that meeting. So such that if somebody missed a meeting, a board member missed, or a member of the community read those minutes, they should be able to understand what happened, how decisions were arrived at, and not be lost by reading those minutes. They should be that clear. So that's a way that we are clear, transparent, and grounded in our principles, that we acknowledge any trade-offs that might exist when we make allocations. Because again, if the board's funding some things, they're not necessarily funding other things because we have a limited supply of funds. So every time the board makes decisions, there are trade-offs involved. So just being honest about that, but also to make sure that what we fund and what we prioritize is in alignment with our responsibilities in Revised Code, Chapter 340. And we're meeting community expectations. We are so blessed to have a local levy in Ashland County. So, what are the community expectations when they pass that levy? Are we meeting those things in every decision that we make, every funding decision, every policy or program decision? And then, we also have to be very consistent with making sure our decisions align with what are the realities of the systems, right? So those funding, yes, but also workforce and policy. Boards aren't allowed to do just anything. We really have to be focused in the realm of mental health and substance use, for example. So it is not the board's responsibility to be in education, right? Or to be in primary health care, or you name it. We have to stay with our lane, if you will. And another way we can help to reduce kind of the transpersonal polarization is to make sure we're engaging our partners. So when our work we know is very likely to impact other systems that we work with in the county, courts, other providers, you name it, Jobs and Family Services, Ohio Rise. So making sure that we engage those partners early on to talk about maybe what the board's planning to do, any of the things that they see that might be problematic or challenging if the board were to go ahead, et cetera, to have those discussions. So again, it's about being clear, transparent, but also collaborative. So again, the aim there is the board is seen as a fair, principled steward of public resources, even when decisions are difficult. And sometimes, quite frankly, they are difficult because we have limited resources. So maybe to wrap up this section, let me just say the one integrated goal is to move from polarization to principled alignment within ourselves, with each other, and across the system. Right? To move from polarization to principled alignment. So again, not necessarily, agreeing on every point, but we're at least aligned within ourselves, with each other, and across the system, so that difficult decisions are made clearly, fairly, and with public trust. So for us, a practical application for the board, this is kind of an easy way maybe to think of it in terms of application. When facing a difficult decision, maybe the individual can ask, am I clear about the values intention here? So am I clear about option A versus option B within myself? Why I feel strongly about A and why I feel strongly about B, and what are the things that are in tension between those two positions? Am I clear about that? So that's within the person. Interpersonal, the practical application there is we ask, do we understand each other's perspectives before deciding? Very critical. I'll talk about this later on, but it's a very good practice. Another takeaway is to explain the other person who has the different opinion, to explain their opinion in such a way that they agree with you. Say, okay, are you saying is this your position? And then state it and say, do I have that correct? That does wonders to make sure you understand each other's perspectives. So both people do that. So if you can accurately state the other person's perspective to them and they agree that you stated it correctly, that's a good step. That's a really good step towards reducing interpersonal polarization. And then transpersonal, can we explain this decision in a way the public would view us as fair and responsible? So even if they may not agree with every aspect, do they understand that the board went through a process that was fair and they were trying to be the best stewards of the limited resources in front of them, also meeting their statutory responsibilities and revised code, right? Would they view that as fair and responsible the way they're acting, even if they don't totally agree on every point? So again, this approach turns polarization from a problem really to eliminate into a signal, right, to guide better decision making. And the reason I think that's an important statement, polarizations, there's always going to be examples where people have strongly held opinions that are different, either within themselves, between one or more people, or between systems. So it's not as if polarization goes away. We don't eliminate it. But again, what it does, if we have these tools, it could signal us, we need to get into our better decision-making process so that we can get through this in a way that's productive. So, okay, real quick, this last piece here, how can we move out of raw and divisive polarization? Some additional strategies within each person. Move from reaction to reflection. All right. So name the tension explicitly. Identify the values in conflicts. So this is blank versus this is blank, the other. So this is A, this is B, really clearly identifying the values within you that are in conflict, whether that's a job, maybe it's working for company A or company B, a relationship, keeping it, not keeping it, entering it, leaving it. Again, you get the idea. Vacation, it could be as simple as that. There might be real tension on where to go. So identify the values that are in conflict, okay? If you can clearly identify it within yourself, that's a good first step. And then, again, instead of saying which is right, maybe how can I hold both of these things responsible? Is there a compromise? Is there a way that I can hold both of these positions responsibly or not? And then slow the decision cycle. Build in pauses before major decisions to avoid snap judgments under pressure. So the point here is, just like it sounds, making snap decisions, snap judgments when you're under a lot of pressure usually don't yield the best results in general. Okay? And then pre-commit to principles. Agree ahead of time on guiding values. Protect your highest risk first. What that means is there are some non-negotiables within each of us that we just, we know that this is a principle that we're not going to violate. So knowing that ahead of time helps guide some of these decisions as well. It also helps to prevent kind of impulsive or emotionally driven decisions, because if you are committed in advance to certain core principles about what make you you, and I don't know what that is for each person, if you know ahead of time that those things are non-negotiables, as the kids would say, that can help. Okay? Now, between people, interpersonal strategies that might be helpful. Move from opposition to understanding. All right, that's the big goal. Opposition to understanding. You start out, it seems like we're opposed to one another in our beliefs. How can we move towards understanding? Again, maybe start with a shared purpose. Our shared purpose is you begin our discussions by naming, okay, well, we all want to kind of work towards better outcomes for youth or families or the community in the case of the board. I told you before about what is called the technical term is STEEL, STEEL, manning, MANNING, STEEL manning. Before disagreeing, require the board members to accurately restate the other position. So I talked about that. So before you get too far into it, make sure the other person can articulate, can name the issue, the other person's position in a way that the other person says, yep, that's correct. That's where I'm at on that. Make sure both sides can do that. That actually builds a lot of respect, and it can reduce this big word called mischaracterization. How many times have you seen this where someone person A mischaracterizes person B's opinion or position. And that just sets off a whole chain of events that is not productive. So that's where steel manning can be so helpful, because both sides can agree, yes, you've got it. That's where I'm at on this issue. So it's very helpful to do that early on. And then so you've done that, you understand there's some disagreement, and maybe ask the person, instead of, never attack the individual. Remember, we're talking about ideas or beliefs. Maybe ask the person, what value are you prioritizing here? Or what risk are you most concerned about? That's a powerful one, because usually behind that really strongly held position is a value or maybe a fear. So asking those questions, what value are you prioritizing here, and what risk are you most concerned about, that'll help guide the conversation in a more productive direction. And again, remember, the person is not the position, right? We have different priorities here. It's not about you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm wrong and you're right. This is about different priorities, right? So that's important. Separate the people from the positions, all right? I know it's a person making the position, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. And limit any kind of binary framing. That's a fancy word, David. What do you mean? Force choices when possible. So try to not say, well, it's my way or the highway. It's this or nothing, as if no compromise is possible. Like there's not even the chance of some kind of hybrid or compromise position, okay? Sometimes that might be the case, but oftentimes, more often than not, compromise doesn't have to be a bad word. There is a hybrid version, hybrid solution that can come up, or sometimes what we call a phased solution. So maybe we, I'm really concerned about this thing, but guess what? If that thing were to occur in phases over time, I'm a lot less concerned about it. You know what I'm saying? So if it didn't happen all at once, but it happened this year, we do this part. Second year, we do that part. Third part, we do this part, right? And then we take into account learnings from the first year and the second year. And that helps shape how we do year 2 and year 3. Hopefully that makes some sense. And I've seen that play out, and it's very effective. All right. And then finally, the transpersonal strategies. Again, the goal here is to move from conflict to legitimacy and alignment. So this is important for us in any organization. Make sure you're using a consistent decision framework, right? So you're using some kind of ethical budgeting framework. For the board, we use the 340 framework in the revised code that really guides us in terms of the kinds of things we're allowed to fund. But also, be really clear about our funding decisions and the trade-offs. Make sure folks realize that we're considering other things. If we're funding A, we can't fund B, but we understand that. We understand that B does have value, perhaps, but we just have limited funds. So we're recognizing that helps reduce an outside perception maybe of arbitrariness or favoritism. And when we're making trade-offs like this, just be explicit and say, funding means we can't fund that. So we can't fund everything. So communicate decisions in a principle-based language. Not, we chose program A over program B, but we prioritized imminent risk and continuity of care, right? So rather than just naming the program and say, we think this is better than this. Why? Right? So as a board or an organization, a business, it's important to talk about why program A over program B. Unpack that more. So we prioritized something within that program or some things in that program over another program. And there should be a reason for that. And again, document, like I told you about the minutes for boards, any kind of meeting minutes. I think that consistent having those things available to the public whenever they request those, or posting them publicly on our website like we do, helps build that public trust. And engaging partners early. I mentioned that in the previous sections. It's very important to bring in other partners that might be impacted to the decisions that you might make as an organization. And people say, well, okay, that's all nice, David, but, give me some more, when things seem like they might be going off the rails, what might we do? Well, maybe try to reset. Here's a simple reset technique for a meeting. When you start to think that polarization is escalating between parties, maybe that's the voices. going up or postures or the way people are sitting. Maybe let's pause. First and foremost, let's pause. Ask everybody, let's slow this down. Let's pause. Let's ask each person, again, what value are you trying to protect here? All right. And just try to get that. And then make sure those values are consistent with the values of the board or the organization you're working for. So it's okay to list those. Say, we have ours posted on our wall for this very reason. So at any point we can say, what value are we trying to protect here? And does that align with the values that are on our wall? Right. So, and if we still find ourselves, at different points, then the way to reframe that is we're not really disagreeing. We're just prioritizing different values. I hope that makes sense. So we can honestly say, in my case, board members, we're not necessarily disagreeing. We're just saying, I'm prioritizing this value maybe higher than you are, right? Or prioritizing different values differently. So that usually de-escalates things pretty quickly. Because again, the agreement is the organization, the company, your agreement is that you want that to be successful possible. How you get there, right? There's different ways to get there, and there's going to be disagreement on the best way to get there. And that often comes down to one person valuing a particular value over this other value, et cetera, or a strategy over another strategy because you think maybe it'll be more effective. Maybe you think it'll be more time effective or cost effective or efficient. So once you do that the de-escalation tends to the situation tends to de-escalate. Tension seems to go away. And again, remember, it's not about who's right, but what are we trying to protect? If there's time is limited in your situation, maybe this is an easy one go to. It's not about who's right here. It's about what are we trying to protect? What is that value or that principle we're trying to protect in our position? All right. Just by doing that one thing, we can reduce defensiveness and it can clarify the trade-offs. And again, it moves the conversation towards decision making, right? And principled decision making rather than just entrenched positions. So bottom line here, breaking polarization does not require eliminating disagreement. Okay. That's important because, as I said, polarization happens. We can't expect to never be polarized in a country and a world as large as the one we live in. That would be unrealistic. But I think it does mean that we can expect better clarity within the individual, intrapersonal. We can expect respectful engagement when there is between individuals. We can expect respectful engagement between the parties. And then at a systems level, I think it's fair to expect consistent principles by that organization or company or business. So I think when those are in place, disagreement becomes, I think, productive rather than divisive. So at the very beginning, I talked about the faith, hope, and love. Sounded a little hokey, but let me just say this: faith can often ground us in truth and purpose. And what that does, that means it anchors us when conditions are uncertain or contested. It reminds us that our work is not ultimate. We are stewards, not saviors. I think it frees leaders from fear-driven decisions and short-term pressure. It keeps focus on human dignity, meaning, responsibility, not just systems or outcomes. And I think faith can often provide a stable reference point when data, policies, or opinions conflict. In practice, faith allows a board to say we will act with integrity and clarity even when outcomes are uncertain. So I think faith, whether we're talking about an individual or an organization or a business, can be extremely helpful. It's not hokey for an individual or an organization to have a faith, a grounding in truth and purpose, and have that clearly articulated. Like I said, having that on the wall is not a bad idea, or written down or framed in your home. Hope, confidence in meaningful progress. What it does, I think hope sustains forward movement without denial of reality. Hope sustains forward movement without denial of reality. Hope as opposed to pessimism, right? So hope recognizes that problems are real but not final, right? Hope prevents drift into cynicism burnout, purely defensive decision-making, and encourage investment in prevention, long-term solutions, human potential and recovery. We all know folks that are more hopeful, and then we know folks that are less hopeful. And that really does change the way the conversation goes. So for my board, when they're hopeful, they're oriented more towards what can be built, not just what must be cut, right? So it's not about programs we need to eliminate or reduce, about what new or different or enhancement or expansions can we be oriented on. So hope allows a board to say something like, even in scarcity, our decisions can move the community toward health and stability. And boy, oh boy, have I seen that with the Ashland County Mental Health and Recovery Board. Even when we've had very limited funding, what a hopeful and creative group. And that hope allows folks, I think, for the creativity to really flourish. So because it's amazing how when you have less, sometimes you're even more creative than when you have more. And then finally, love. This orientation towards people. What it does, it directs decisions towards the good of others, especially the vulnerable, which is what our board is all about. It helps center the questions that we have. Who is most at risk of being harmed if we get this wrong, right? So we're asking ourselves this. Who is most at risk of being harmed if we get this wrong? Because we care about those individuals. So that helps protect against kind of a technocratic decision-making, a non-personal decision-making process. It definitely helps protect us against reducing people to numbers or categories, which is deadly. These are individuals. These are not just numbers on a page, right? These are not, 35% of these people, were successful or failed. No, these are individual lives, all with stories. So it really calls us to be compassionate, to be patient, to sacrifice responsibly. And again, none of my board members are paid for their time. They do this. They sacrifice their time and their talents, their treasure, because they love the folks that benefit, when they get decisions right. Right. So in practice, love ensures that every decision considers the real human lives behind the data. OK, that's critical. How they work together. I promise I'm getting towards the end. Faith guards against fear, confusion, and drifting values. It produces clarity. It produces integrity. Hope guards against cynicism. It guards against short-term thinking, and it produces forward movement. And finally, love guards against cold calculation, indifference, and it produces human-centered decisions, right? So faith, hope, and love, they really have a place in this whole polarization discussion. When facing difficult choices, my board, faith asks them to answer this. Are we grounded in what is true and right? Hope asks them, are we building towards something better, even in constraints? And love asks, who will be most affected, and how do we care for them well? Right now, we're dealing with the homeless issue in Ashland County. So we know how much that's impacting families and individuals. So how do we care for them well? What's our role in all of that? So maybe a final thought before we wrap up today is faith steadies us, hope moves us, and love directs us. Together, they allow leaders to face uncertainty, not with avoidance or division, but with clarity, courage, compassion as they step into what comes next. So I appreciate you spending some time. It's a slightly different episode, but this is running almost 44 minutes, and I think I've got about 25 minutes or 35 minutes tonight. So you see how you benefited by all this additional information. But if you are interested, I think the Redbird Resilient folks will record video, I think audio of the event down at the Ohio Theater, so you can watch that on playback, and you'll hear other people besides myself, so you can just fast forward through me so you can hear the other folks. But anyway, thanks for taking this time on the Keeping Ashland Healthy podcast. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Keeping Ashland Healthy podcast. The podcast is a production of the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Ashland County, Ohio. You can reach the board by calling 419-281-3139. Please remember that the board funds a local 24/7 crisis line through Appleseed Community Mental Health Center. It can be reached by calling 419-289-6111. That's 419-289-6111. Until next time, please join us in Keeping Ashland Healthy.